I don't know if anyone will believe me. I wouldn't believe me, but this is real. It happened. And every time I close my eyes, I see it again. My name is Eric, and I grew up spending summers at my family's lake house in Maine. The place was old, passed down through generations. It wasn't fancy, just a wooden cabin nestled among towering pines, with a creaky dock stretching out into the dark waters of Lake Wessarunset. Every summer, I would count down the days until we packed up the car and drove north, where the air was fresh. The nights were cool, and the lake was my personal kingdom. But there was one night that changed everything. It was late, maybe around midnight. My parents had gone to bed, and I was out on the dock with my fishing rod, a lantern beside me, casting a warm glow on the water. The lake was still. Too still. Normally, there were sounds, crickets chirping, the rustling of trees, the distant hoot of an owl. But that night, there was nothing. Just silence. Then, I saw it. At first, I thought it was a log drifting lazily across the water. But then, it blinked. I froze. My hands gripped the fishing rod so tightly my knuckles turned white. Whatever it was, it had eyes. Dark, sunken eyes just above the surface, locked onto me. It didn't move like an animal. It didn't swim, didn't bob with the gentle motion of the water. It just stared. A shiver ran down my spine. The air around me felt heavier, colder. I wanted to turn away, to run back to the cabin, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't listen. I was trapped in its gaze. Then it moved. Not in a way that made sense, not with paddling, not with a ripple of fins. It glided, smooth and slow, directly toward the dock. My breath caught in my throat. The closer it came, the clearer its shape became. It wasn't just eyes. There was a face beneath the surface, pale, elongated, almost human but wrong. Its skin was slick and mottled, like something that had been underwater too long. I grabbed my flashlight with shaking hands and flicked it on, aiming the beam directly at it. And just like that, it was gone. The water was empty, undisturbed, like nothing had been there at all. But I knew what I had seen, then I heard it. A slithering sound, like something wet dragging itself over wood. My stomach dropped. It wasn't in the water anymore. It was on the dock. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The beam cut through the darkness, and for the briefest moment I saw it, something hunched, pale, dripping. Then, it was gone. I ran. I don't remember getting back to the cabin. 1 second, I was on the dock. The next, I was slamming the door shut and locking it. My parents woke up to my frantic breathing, my wide, terrified eyes. I tried to explain, but how do you tell someone you saw something that shouldn't exist? They said it was a dream. Said I must have dozed off and imagined it. But I know what I saw. And I know this. Lake Wessarunset is not empty. Something is in that water and it's watching. 2 years later, I never went back to the lake after that summer. My parents thought it was a phase, teenage anxiety, or just a story I had told myself so many times I had come to believe it. But I knew better. Something was in that water and I wanted nothing to do with it. But then, the phone call came. It was my uncle, Sam. He owned a place just a few miles up the shore from our cabin. He was a gruff man, not prone to telling stories or exaggerating. But his voice was different that night, shaken, urgent. "Eric," he said, "I need you to tell me what you saw that night. My blood ran cold. No one had ever taken my story seriously. Why? What happened? He hesitated. There was an accident. The dock collapsed. What do you mean? Tommy went missing. Tommy was my cousin, a year younger than me. They're saying it was the current, Uncle Sam continued. But I saw it. I saw something in the water, and now I can't find my boy. I didn't want to go back. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay away, but I couldn't ignore the fear in my uncle's voice. If Tommy was missing, if whatever was in that lake had taken him, then I had to know. I had to see for myself, back at the lake. When I arrived at the cabin, it was different. The place felt abandoned. Not physically. My uncle was there, along with a few other people searching the shore, but the air was thick with something heavy, something unseen. It's been 3 days, Uncle Sam said, running a hand through his graying hair. They found his boat overturned, but no sign of him, not even a body. I swallowed hard. Where did you see it? His eyes flicked to the dock, what was left of it. The wood had splintered, jagged and broken, as if something had torn it apart from below. There, he pointed. Right before the storm rolled in, I saw eyes in the water, just watching. Then the dock gave way. The search party left by evening, leaving only me and my uncle. He was a wreck, pacing the cabin, mumbling to himself. I sat by the window, staring at the lake. Then, around midnight, I saw it again. A shape, just beneath the surface. Those same sunken eyes, peering up at me. And then I heard it. A whisper? Faint? Distorted? My name? I grabbed my uncle's arm. Do you hear that? He nodded slowly, face pale as a sheet. It wants us to go to the water. No, I whispered, I want something else. And then, the door creaked open. The rest of that night is a blur. We ran. We didn't stop until we were miles away. The next morning, the searchers found something tangled in the reeds. It wasn't Tommy. It wasn't human. We never went back to the lake again, and we never spoke of what we saw, because some things aren't meant to be known. Some things are meant to stay in the water. I remember the first time I heard the voice. It was late, well past midnight, and the lake outside my aunt's cabin was still, black as ink under the moonlight. I was never one to be afraid of the water, but something about that night made the air feel thick, heavy with something unseen. It started as a whisper, a distant call that I first thought was the wind rustling through the trees. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. My name. My blood turned to ice. Lena. I turned to my cousin, Emma, who was lying on the bed across the room, her breath slow and steady in sleep. No way it was her. The voice came from outside, from the water. I hesitated before walking toward the window, heart hammering in my chest. The wooden floor creaked under my weight, every sound amplified in the eerie silence. I pulled the curtains aside and looked out. That's when I saw it. A figure stood waist-deep in the lake, motionless, staring toward the shore. The moonlight barely touched its form, but I could see it. Tall, shadowy, the water rippling gently around it. My stomach twisted. I slammed the curtains shut, stumbling backward. My breath came in short gasps as I backed away from the window. My mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? Maybe Emma had set it up to scare me. But when I woke her up, her confusion was genuine. What are you talking about?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. I told her what I saw, but she just frowned. "That's not funny, Lena. I'm not joking." She groaned, rolled over, and buried her face in the pillow. Go back to sleep. But sleep was the last thing on my mind. I crept out of our room, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. My aunt's bedroom door was slightly open, and I knocked softly before pushing it open. "Aunt Marie," I whispered. She stirred and turned on the bedside lamp, squinting at me. "Lena, what is it?" I hesitated. I think there's someone in the lake." Her face went pale instantly. She sat up, her expression unreadable. "What did you see?" I described the figure. The way it stood there, silent, unmoving, half submerged in the water. The moment I mentioned the voice, she closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. "You heard him," she said, almost too quiet to hear. I frowned. "Who?" She turned to her nightstand and pulled open the drawer, taking out a small old photograph. It was faded, the edges curled, but I could make out the face of a young boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old. His wide grin was frozen in time, but there was something sad in his eyes. "His name was Daniel," she said, voice trembling. "He drowned in that lake 20 years ago. People say his spirit lingers, calling out to anyone who will listen. They say he tries to lure them in." A chill ran down my spine. "You believe that?" She met my gaze, her eyes dark, with something I couldn't quite place. I've lived here long enough to know that some things can't be explained. A heavy silence filled the room. The weight of her words pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. "Come morning," she said, "you stay away from that lake. Promise me." I nodded, but I knew even then that the sleep wouldn't come for me that night. And I knew deep down that the voice wouldn't stop calling, not until I answered. I can still hear the splashing. It haunts me, echoing through my mind when I least expect it. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I swear I can hear that gasping sound again, like someone drowning just beyond my reach. My name is Chris, and I want to tell you about something that happened to my wife and me at a lake house. A weekend that was supposed to be peaceful, but turned into something I can't explain. It started as a simple getaway. My wife, Emily, and I had been feeling the weight of our daily routine, the endless grind of work, responsibilities, and city life pressing down on us. So, when I found a listing for a secluded lake house up north, it seemed perfect. A quiet retreat, just the two of us, away from the noise of the world. The pictures showed a rustic wooden cabin, a large deck overlooking the water, and a private dock that extended into the lake. It looked like something out of a dream, a perfect place to unwind. The drive up was peaceful, the roads winding through dense forests, the kind of place where you could almost believe you were the only two people left on Earth. When we arrived, the lake was breathtaking. It was vast, stretching far beyond what I had imagined, with mist curling over the surface. The water was so still, so black, that it looked like glass. It was beautiful, but something about it felt off. I remember Emily shivering slightly when she first saw it. "It's colder than I expected," she said, hugging herself. "It's probably just the altitude," I reassured her. The lake house itself was cozy, if a little outdated. The furniture had that musty, well-worn feel of a place that had seen countless visitors over the years. An old fireplace stood in the corner, and large windows faced the water. It was exactly what we needed. A place to disconnect, to breathe. The first night was peaceful. We made dinner, shared a bottle of wine, and sat by the dock, letting the sounds of nature wash over us. Crickets chirped, owls hooted in the distance, and the water gently lapped against the wooden posts. There wasn't another soul around for miles. Or so we thought. It was on the second night that everything changed. We were sitting by the dock again, wrapped in blankets, watching the moon cast its pale light over the lake. That's when we heard it. A splash. Not the kind made by a fish or a branch falling into the water. It was heavier, like something or someone moving beneath the surface. Emily tensed beside me. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, grabbing the flashlight we had brought with us. Probably just a beaver or something. But then we heard it, the gasping. Ragged, desperate breathing, like someone struggling to stay afloat. It sent a chill through my entire body. Without thinking, I stood and aimed the flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rippling water. At first, we saw nothing, just endless black water. But then, she surfaced. A pale, bloated face rose from the depths, staring directly at us. Her eyes were hollow, lifeless. Her mouth frozen in a silent scream. Water dripped from her stringy dark hair as she hovered there for a moment, as if waiting for something. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she sank back under, vanishing without a trace. Emily grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Chris, what was that?" I didn't have an answer. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what we had just seen. A trick of the light? A hallucination? A drowning victim? But that last thought didn't make sense. There had been no reports of anyone drowning recently. And yet, we had both seen her. We ran back to the cabin and called the police. When they arrived, they searched at He Lake but found nothing. No body, no signs of struggle. Nothing to suggest that anyone had been in the water at all. The next morning, as we packed our bags, still shaken from the night before, the owner of the lake house stopped by. He was an older man, kind, with deep lines on his face that spoke of years spent by the water. "You folks look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a chuckle. But when he saw the seriousness in our eyes, his smile faded. I told him what we had seen, expecting him to laugh it off or try to offer some logical explanation. Instead, he sighed and nodded. "You're not the first," he said quietly. "Years ago, a woman drowned out there, not far from the dock. Some say she fell, others, well, some believe she was pulled under by something. Either way, she was never found. And on certain nights when the fog rolls in, people say she comes back, still trying to reach for help that never comes." We left that morning, the lake house retreat turning into a nightmare neither of us wanted to relive. But even now, months later, I still hear it sometimes. The gasping, the splashing. And I wonder, was she trying to warn us, or was she trying to pull us in?